Thank you, Richard. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you, Richard, Dagan. Thank you, Saskia, and to the entire What Design Can Do team. It's fantastic to be here. I wanted to start this morning with some hope, some possibility. It's a very heavy subject that we are here to talk about, but we are going to talk about it through the lens of design. Last week at Parsons School of Design, and in fact across many universities in the United States, was graduation. Everybody walking around in funny robes with mortarboards, celebrating a moment of hope, of possibility, of achievement. And it's not a kind of naive hope. It's not a sentimental hope. It's actually a critical, engaged possibility of the use of design in a world that is desperately in need of it. And in fact, a world that has been designed to be the way it is today. The argument of the Anthropocene, the subject that I want to talk to you about this morning, is precisely that we live in a moment in history in which human capacity, in which our actions as humans of transforming the planet have become the dominant transformative force, the ecological transformative force of this age, of this Anthropocene, literally the age of the new human. And you can see with all of this academic reframing and parentheses and so forth that I'm not terribly comfortable with some of the language that we use around the Anthropocene. And if you come this afternoon to talk to us and work with us collaboratively in the workshop, we'll go deep into the subject. Today, I just really want to introduce to you this idea. And in doing so, and if this were a conference in the United States, I might have to be introducing the science of it. In the introduction as you came in, you heard some of the political context in which we deal with this issue in the US today. But because this is essentially preaching to the choir, I don't think that there is a member of this audience who is wondering about the integrity of the science or about the urgency of the questions in front of us. So really, the issue is, how do we choose to act? How do we take this moment of the Anthropocene and reframe it, given the agency and the context of design, to make positive change in the world? The images that begin this talk, or this few minutes, are really there to help us translate, to communicate the challenges that we face. I've always liked this particular information graphic because it allows you to understand temperature change over the course of the Industrial Revolution, and you can see that we are approaching the 1.5 degree increase in global average temperatures. That is the sort of tipping point that we are trying to, through the Paris Accords, hold as a maximum. I'm sure you've all seen the Keeling curve many times. You've looked at the geological history. You've seen the kind of ice core data that goes back and looks at global atmospheric carbon dioxide. And so again, just the sort of framing of this. This slide in particular, for all of you that are graphic designers in the room, is an opportunity.
I'll get back to you on that, Joe.
If you sort of put it back together as an ice core, it is the history of the way scientists, in what is a truly fantastic title, the Chrono Stratigraphic chart, stratigraphy. This is basically the ways in which scientists will mark geological eras. It's the 4.5 to 5 billion year history of the planet. And what you see at the very top in the Holocene, the age in which all of human history has evolved, the 12,000 years or so of this interglacial period in which human culture and society has evolved, is this tiny little fraction of time. And you can choose your favorite. If you're Hollywood fans, you can look at the Jurassic or the Triassic. You can look at these periods of time, but you see them as a long, long history. And then in this last moment, in this last period of time, the role that humanity has played has been transformative. It has been designed to be the way it is. Design understood as the transformation of the energy flows of the planet into the spaces and places and objects of everyday life. This is what we do. And so I find that to be quite empowering, because it's really been designed poorly. But it doesn't mean that it couldn't be designed better. This is the moment in which we live. So the Anthropocene as an idea, Again, some language that we need to be working on, but how do you get there? Crutzen and Sturmer's introduction of the title itself, the Anthropocene, in the year 2000, based on the kind of data that collects not just from carbon dioxide, but looks at all sorts of issues around population, energy use, the kinds of questions that you might say a designer would use to frame what are we trying to answer when we say, how do we reframe the Anthropocene? What is the design question? What is our task as designers in the age of the Anthropocene? Richard and I need to coordinate our slides. This is the second time that you are seeing the UN Sustainable Development Goals. You probably will see them or hear about them because it's a framing device for us to say, what are the issues? How are we asking the questions, breaking them down into areas of work? But ultimately, I think, if we believe that the world that we live in, the moment that we live in, is a result of human activity, and I think deep inside, both in our hearts and in our minds, we know that this is, in fact, the case, that we have structured society and the impacts that we have had, we have to rethink the way we design. We have to redesign design itself. The criteria by which we evaluate its ultimate success. We have to be working at every scale across a range of different disciplines, whether that's about storytelling and narration of this particular moment, or whether that is about architecture or urbanism, or whether it is about redesigning the product systems and services of everyday life. We have to go back and be setting questions and educating and working as practitioners to say, what constitutes success in design? Is it purely commercial? Or is it working at a deeper level? Is it understanding essentially the challenge, the urgency we face to evolve as a species, to be thinking about our actions differently? Just a couple of little seeded ideas. I hope you all recognize Paul MacCready's 1973 Gossamer Albatross, the first human-powered flight, in this case a 3-hour journey across the English Channel, as a kind of paradigmatic moment in which we begin to rethink the potential of design. A small project here from Parsons School of Design, in this case a project in Washington, D.C. The importance of this project in this presentation is that it is a passive house focused on the making available passive house design at affordable prices. And so in this case, we were working with Habitat for Humanity as a partner, and we were translating the knowledge of how to build passive house at affordable prices, and now Habitat has gone on to build many more of these projects in Washington. Natalia Allen is also a graduate of Parsons, in this case focusing on zero-waste fashion design. I imagine somebody will quote to you over the course of this day that fashion industry is the second most polluting industry in the world after oil and gas, and nobody really wants to be second after oil and gas. And so rethinking fashion through technology, in this case 3D knitting, in order to have the garments come out fully constructed without waste, is the work that Natalia is doing. And interestingly, someone who has both a fashion design and a technology degree at that crossover. And the last brief project I'll show you, because I don't have time to go into what is a combined sewer system in New York City. Basically what that means is that the stormwater and the wastewater are combined into one pipe, which means when it rains, New York City is in the habit of dumping sewage into the waters around the city because it overflows. The capacity of the wastewater treatment plants is not there to be able to manage that. And so now, not just with heavy storms, but with very little rainfall, we have a series of combined sewer overflows. It's a design problem. It was designed poorly. How you change that is another question. And then Leif Persefeld, in this case, is working at a very, very micro level with a project that's called Don't Flush Me, which is able to communicate with the owner of the toilet, to say the resident, that the storm event is large enough to produce combined sewer overflows in the neighborhood of their sewage shed, where the waste would flow to the wastewater treatment plants, and informs them not to flush their toilet, so that they're not adding capacity into that overflow. So I genuinely think that this era that we are in, the epoch that we have produced, the Anthropocene, requires us to be evolving, to be rethinking at a time and at a scale that requires all of our optimism, all of our hope, but also a kind of urgency. And so I want to end this brief introduction with just a couple of thoughts. It wouldn't be a conference on climate change if you didn't see this image, so here you are. It's an image that is both widely known, but has had transformative impact on our understanding of the fragile blue planet. The image is called Earthrise. It is from 1968. The Apollo 8 astronauts took this picture. It's actually a constructed image, but took this picture. And it is in many ways seen as the beginning of the modern environmental movement. The image itself brings to the fore the question that we face as a society. And it graces the cover of the whole Earth catalog. There's a long history to this particular image. I don't think that we have figured out what the image of the Anthropocene is. I think you can look at Earthrise, you can think about the beginning of the environmental movement across, or the modern environmental movement in the 60s. You can think about the incredible work of somebody like a Jonathan Schell, asking the question in the fate of the Earth, does the Anthropocene begin with Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Does it begin with the Industrial Revolution? Whether or not we are 150 years into the Anthropocene, or 60 years, or 50 years into it, we are in it. It is the time in which we live. And I think this image, a similar view of the Earth from space, but in this case, tracking the detritus, the garbage, the waste that must be tracked and mapped that surrounds our planet in order to avoid unintended collisions with communication satellites and other objects orbiting the Earth on which all of our lives depend, at least our communication lives depend, and so much more. And so this is a map of garbage. It's a map of waste. It's a map of the unintended consequences of design. And so when we look at Earthrise and we look at this tracking of garbage, I think we see the challenge in front of us at a planetary scale. This is design in which we don't account for our waste. It's not circular design. It's not a design that takes into account the realities, the unintended consequences, the externalities of design. We have been externalizing carbon dioxide as a waste product without accounting for it in our design process since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And so when you go back to Earthrise, when you come back to this image of the planet, it reminds me of something that I would like to leave you with this morning. 1968 is when this image is produced. 1968 is also the date in which Martin Luther King Jr. publishes what would ultimately be his final book, his last text, because it's the year he's assassinated. In 1968, King publishes a book under the title, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? And in that book is an essay called The World House. It's a reflection on the notion of a global community, the notion of a community confronting the realities of the time in which it lives, confronting essentially what we would today call the Anthropocene. And in that book, King says, we are faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. And then, in a turn of phrase that former President Obama would give new meaning to many years later, Martin Luther King concludes, we must confront the fierce urgency of now. And that's what the Anthropocene means. It is the time in which we live. It is the time in which design must play a role as the transformative force of human agency in action, in rethinking how we are to live in this world, how we are going to learn to live in the Anthropocene rather than how we are going to learn to die in the Anthropocene. This is the moment in time in which we live, and to me, personally, As an educator, as an architect, as someone who's been working in this space for now 3 decades, I find this an incredibly optimistic moment in which to live. And I don't mean that easily or naively. I mean that if we take the agency of design, if we figure out how to work collaboratively, if we reframe the criteria by which we evaluate the success or failure of our actions, then the Anthropocene is a moment, a turning point in human history, in which we realize the potential of our species to transform this planet for good. And that is a complicated thing to say. It is not an easy question. It fills me with fear sometimes, but that's where that urgency comes from. But mostly it fills me with hope and possibility. And so that's the notion I want to leave you with this morning at the beginning of this conference, is that design and possibility and change is what you all have brought to us. Thank you so much. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing the rest of the presentations today. Thank you.